The bullet left the muzzle at 2,800 feet per second, cutting through the thin mountain air of Afghanistan like a whisper of death. 20-year-old Marine Lance Corporal Marcus Chen felt the familiar kick of his M40A5 sniper rifle against his shoulder, but this time was different. This time, the mathematics of ballistics had bent to something beyond calculation, beyond training, beyond anything the Marine Corps had taught him in the windswept ranges of Camp Pendleton. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. The target, a Taliban commander preparing to detonate an IED that would have vaporized a school bus filled with 43 children dropped instantly at a distance that would later be measured at 2,847 meters. Nearly 3 kilometers. A shot that, according to every ballistics expert who would later examine the evidence, should have been physically impossible given the rifle, the ammunition, the atmospheric conditions, and the curvature of the earth itself. But Marcus Chen wasn't thinking about physics as he watched through his scope. He was thinking about the small girl in the yellow dress he'd seen boarding that bus 3 hours earlier, her gap-toothed smile as bright as the Afghan sun. He was thinking about his little sister Emma back in San Francisco, who wore that same expression when she played hopscotch on the cracked sidewalk outside their apartment building. He was thinking about promises made and kept, about the weight of a trigger pulled with the precision of prayer. The silence that followed the shot seemed to stretch across the entire Kunar province, settling into the rocky crevices of the Hindu Kush mountains like ancient dust. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, lying prone beside Marcus, slowly lowered his binoculars, his weathered face frozen in an expression somewhere between awe and disbelief. "Jesus Christ, Chen," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind that had been howling across the ridge all morning. "What the hell did you just do?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He was still pressed against his rifle, eye to scope, watching the school bus continue its journey down the dusty road below, oblivious to the catastrophe that had just been prevented. The children inside were singing. He could hear their voices, carried on the wind, a melody in Pashto that he didn't understand but felt in his bones nonetheless. Their innocence remained intact, their futures unshattered, their mother's hearts still whole. The spotter's logbook would later record wind speeds of 37 knots, gusting to 45, with a temperature differential that created thermals, capable of throwing a bullet 6 feet off course at half the distance Marcus had just covered. The humidity was wrong, the barometric pressure was dropping ahead of an incoming storm, and the angle of the shot required compensating for not just bullet drop, but the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the earth itself. Gunnery Sergeant Patricia Hawkins had been watching from the command post 2 clicks away, coordinating the mission through her radio headset while simultaneously calculating firing solutions on her tablet. 22 years in the Corps, recipient of the Bronze Star for her actions in Fallujah, and she had never seen anything that defied the fundamental laws of marksmanship the way Marcus Chen's shot just had. Her hands trembled slightly as she raised the radio to her lips. "Overwatch 1, this is CP. Confirm target neutralized. How copy?" "CP, Overwatch 1. Target is down. Repeat, target is down. Children are safe." Marcus's voice came through the static steady and calm, but Hawkins could hear something underneath it, not pride, not excitement, but a kind of quiet bewilderment, as if he himself couldn't quite believe what had just happened. The brass cartridge case lay beside Marcus in the rocky dirt, still warm to the touch. Later, ballistics experts would examine this single piece of evidence with the intensity of archaeologists studying an ancient artifact. They would measure every dimension, analyze the primer strike, test the powder residue. They would find nothing unusual, nothing that could explain how a standard 7.62 millimeters NATO round had somehow defied every known principle of exterior ballistics. Private First Class Tommy Nakamura, the team's communications specialist, had been filming the mission for routine after-action review when Marcus took the shot. The footage would become legendary within military circles, studied at sniper schools and ballistics laboratories around the world. But in that moment, Tommy simply stared at his camera's LCD screen, replaying the few seconds of video over and over, watching the impossible trajectory traced by the barely visible vapor trail against the clear Afghan sky. The Taliban commander's body lay motionless beside the improvised explosive device he'd been preparing to trigger. Intelligence later revealed that the IED contained over 200 pounds of military-grade explosives, packed with ball bearings and fragments of rusty metal enough to turn the school bus into a crater and its young passengers into memory. The detonator, a simple cell phone connected to a battery pack, rested in his dead fingers, the screen still glowing with an unsent message that would have initiated the explosion. But it was the personal items scattered around the commander's position that would haunt Marcus for years to come. A photograph of a young boy, perhaps 8 years old, tucked into the man's vest pocket. A letter written in careful Arabic script, folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn white. A small wooden prayer bead, polished smooth by countless fingers. Evidence of a life that, despite its terrible final purpose, had once contained love and hope and dreams deferred. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of wild poppies that grew in impossible profusion across these war-torn mountainsides. Marcus inhaled deeply, tasting dust and cordite and something that reminded him of his grandmother's garden in Chinatown, where she'd taught him to cultivate patience and precision, while tending her impossible collection of orchids in coffee cans and mason jars. Chen, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice brought him back to the present. We need to move. Extract point is 12 minutes out, and there's going to be a shitstorm of questions when we get back to base. Marcus finally lifted his head from the scope, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the broader perspective of the mountainous landscape around them. The Hindu Kush stretched endlessly in every direction, peaks and valleys carved by millennia of wind and weather and war. Somewhere in those mountains, other children were walking to school. Other mothers were preparing meals. Other fathers were making choices between survival and morality that no human being should ever have to make. The M40A5 rifle in his hands felt heavier now, its weight increased not by physics, but by the magnitude of what had just occurred. This weapon, manufactured in a sterile factory in Connecticut, shipped halfway around the world, and placed in the hands of a 20-year-old kid from San Francisco's Richmond district, had just reached across nearly 3 kilometers of hostile terrain to save 43 lives. But as Marcus began the methodical process of securing his weapon and preparing for extraction, one question echoed in his mind with the persistence of a prayer. How had he known? Not the ballistics, those could be calculated, compensated for, adjusted with enough skill and experience. But how had he known, with absolute certainty, exactly when to squeeze the trigger? How had he felt the precise moment when all the variables, wind, temperature, humidity, the rotation of the earth itself, aligned into a narrow window of possibility that lasted perhaps half a second? The school bus had disappeared around a bend in the mountain road, carrying its precious cargo toward safety and the mundane miracles of another ordinary day. But the echo of that impossible shot would reverberate through Marcus Chen's life for decades to come, changing not just his destiny, but the destinies of everyone who witnessed what happened on a windswept ridge in Afghanistan on a Tuesday morning. In October, as the extraction helicopter's rotors began to thrum in the distance, Marcus took one last look through his scope at the empty mountainside, where the Taliban commander's body lay still and silent. The morning sun was climbing higher now, casting long shadows between the rocks and illuminating the countless hidden stories that these ancient mountains held. And somewhere in that vast landscape of beauty and brutality, 43 children, were arriving at school, alive and laughing, and completely unaware that their futures had just been preserved by a shot that should never have been possible. Marcus Chun's hands were still shaking when he walked into the mess tent 6 hours later. The debriefing had lasted 4 hours, 4 hours of ballistics experts, intelligence officers, and command staff asking the same questions in different ways, as if repetition might unlock the secret of what had happened on that ridge. Each time, Marcus gave the same answer. I saw the target, calculated the variables, and took the shot. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. What had happened on that ridge. Each time, gave the same answer. I saw the target. Sarah's camera clicked once, capturing the moment of impact, and then she lowered it, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. Jake Morrison stood frozen beside her, his eyes wide as he stared at the unconscious form of Marcus Rodriguez, the man who had been terrorizing sparring partners and opponents alike for the better part of a decade. Tommy Kowalski climbed through the ropes with the urgency of someone who had seen plenty of knockouts, but never one quite like this. He knelt beside Marcus, checking his pulse and lifting his eyelids to examine his pupils. Marcus was breathing steadily, his pulse strong, but he was completely unconscious. Jesus Christ, Tommy muttered, looking up at Maya, who stood exactly where she had been when she threw the punch. She wasn't celebrating, wasn't gloating, wasn't even breathing hard. She looked down at Marcus with what might have been sympathy, then began unwrapping her hands. Is he going to be okay? Maya asked quietly. Tommy nodded slowly, still trying to process what he had just witnessed. Yeah, he'll be fine. Just took a good shot to the button. But lady, he paused, searching for the right words. Who the hell are you? Maya finished unwrapping her left hand and started on her right. I'm nobody special, she said, though her voice carried a weight that suggested otherwise. I just came here to train. The crowd began to close in around the ring, fighters and trainers alike wanting to get a closer look at the woman who had just accomplished what no one in the gym thought possible. Questions flew from every direction. Where had she learned to fight? Who had trained her? Was she a professional? Why hadn't anyone heard of her? Maya ignored them all, sliding through the ropes and gathering her small gym bag from ringside. She pulled out a water bottle and took a small sip, her hands steady, her breathing still controlled. Marcus began to stir on the canvas, groaning softly as consciousness slowly returned. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused, and Tommy helped him sit up slowly. What happened? Marcus mumbled, his words slightly slurred. You got tagged, son, Tommy said gently. Clean knockout. Nothing to be ashamed of, happens to the best of us. Marcus looked around the ring, his gaze settling on Maya as she prepared to leave. The memory of the fight came back to him in pieces, her impossible evasions, the way she had moved through his combinations like smoke, and then nothing. Hey, he called out, his voice still weak but gaining strength. Hey, wait up. Maya paused at the edge of the crowd, turning back toward the ring. The gathered fighters parted to let Marcus through as he climbed down from the canvas, still unsteady. On his feet but determined to reach her before she left. That was... Marcus started, then stopped, searching for words that seemed inadequate. I've never seen anything like that. Where did you learn to do that? Maya studied his face for a moment, as if trying to decide whether he was genuinely curious or simply looking for an excuse to explain away his embarrassment. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because her expression softened slightly. My grandfather taught me. Your grandfather? Sarah had pushed through the crowd, her camera hanging around her neck, forgotten in favor of the story unfolding. Before her, was he a boxer? Maya shook her head. Not exactly. She shouldered her bag and headed toward the exit. Thank you for the training session, she called back to Tommy. I'll see you tomorrow night. And then she was gone, disappearing through the front door of Murphy's boxing gym. And leaving behind a crowd of stunned fighters and one very unconscious ego, Tommy looked around at the assembled faces, all wearing variations of the same expression of bewilderment and disbelief. In 30 years of running the gym, he had seen plenty of upsets, plenty of surprises, but nothing quite like this. A woman who looked like she might blow away in a strong wind had just knocked out one of the hardest hitters in the city with a single punch. "Well," he said finally, his voice cutting through the excited chatter that had begun to fill the void left by Maya's departure, "I guess we'll be seeing more of her." He had no idea how right he was, or how much that one punch would change everything. Maya Chen's apartment sat on the 4th floor of a pre-war building in Chinatown, where the smell of dumplings from the restaurant below mixed with the exhaust fumes that drifted up from Canal Street. The narrow stairwell creaked with each step, its wooden banister worn smooth by decades of hands sliding along its surface. Paint peeled from the walls in lazy strips, revealing layers of color that told the story of the building's long life. Mint green beneath beige beneath what might have once been yellow. She climbed the stairs slowly, her gym bag slung over her shoulder, her breathing still steady despite the 4 flights. The hallway was dimly lit by a single bare bulb that cast long shadows across the faded carpet. Maya's key slid into the lock of apartment 4B with a soft click, and she stepped inside to the familiar embrace of solitude. The apartment was small, but meticulously organized. A single room served as living area, bedroom, and dining room, with a tiny kitchen tucked into one corner and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. But every inch of space was utilized with the precision of someone who had learned to make do with very little. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, philosophy texts mixed with martial arts manuals, poetry collections nestled beside technical journals on biomechanics and human anatomy. Maya set her bag down beside the door and removed her shoes, placing them precisely parallel to each other on a small mat. She moved through her post-training routine with the mechanical precision of someone who had performed these same actions thousands of times before. Water glass filled and emptied. Shower taken. Hands examined for any cuts or bruises from the evening's work. In the bathroom mirror, she studied her reflection with clinical detachment. The face looking back at her was unremarkable in most ways, oval-shaped with high cheekbones that spoke to her mixed heritage, dark eyes that seemed older than her 28 years, lips that rarely smiled. There was no mark on her from the evening's encounter, no sign that she had just knocked unconscious a man twice her size. Her knuckles weren't even red. She changed into loose cotton pajamas and moved to the small kitchen, where she began preparing her evening meal with the same methodical care she applied to everything else. Rice in the cooker, precise measurements of water. Vegetables chopped with mechanical precision, each piece exactly the same size. A small portion of fish, seasoned simply with salt and pepper. As she cooked, Maya's mind drifted back to the gym, to the moment when Marcus had looked at her with that mixture of confusion and grudging respect. It was a look she had seen before, many times, though usually not in settings quite so public. The look of someone realizing that their assumptions about the world had been fundamentally wrong. She had been honest when she told them her grandfather had taught her. What she hadn't mentioned was that her grandfather had been dead for 15 years. Or that the lessons he had given her went far deeper than simple fighting techniques. Chen Wei had been a small man, even smaller than Maya, with hands that looked like they belonged on a pianist rather than a fighter. But those hands had been capable of things that defied explanation. Maya had been 12 then, already showing signs of the height she would never achieve, already dealing with the casual cruelty that children reserved for those who were different. Her grandfather had seen something in her that day when she came home with a black eye and a bloody nose, something that made him decide to share secrets he had kept hidden for decades. The training had been unlike anything she could have imagined. Hours spent standing in positions that seemed impossible, learning to breathe in ways that made her feel like she was discovering oxygen for the first time. Chen never called it martial arts, never used terms like kung fu or karate. He simply called it understanding the body, and he taught Maya to see the human form as a complex machine with very specific points of vulnerability and strength. Maya finished cooking her dinner and sat at the small table that served as her desk, surrounded by the books that had become her constant companion since her grandfather's death. She ate slowly, methodically, while reading from a journal she had been keeping for the past 3 years. The entries were detailed analyses of confrontations, not fights. Exactly, but moments when she had been forced to use what her grandfather had taught her: the bouncer at the club who had grabbed her inappropriately, the businessman who had cornered her in an empty subway car, the group of teenagers who had thought she looked like an easy target as she walked home from her job at the library. Each encounter was documented with scientific precision. Movements used, the amount of force applied, the results achieved. Maya studied these entries like a researcher studying data, looking for patterns and ways to improve. She had never wanted to hurt anyone. That was the truth that kept her awake some nights, staring at the ceiling of her tiny apartment and wondering if she was becoming something her grandfather had never intended. Chen had taught her these techniques for self-defense, to protect herself in a world that could be cruel to small women who seemed defenseless. He had never expected her to seek out confrontation, to deliberately place herself in situations where she might need to use his teachings. But Maya had discovered something about herself over the years, something that both thrilled and terrified her. She was good at this. Not just competent, not just adequate for self-defense, but genuinely, remarkably gifted. The techniques came naturally to her. And she was tired of being invisible. Maya had spent her entire adult life blending into the background, working jobs that required her to be pleasant and accommodating, smiling at people who looked through her as if she didn't exist. She was a senior librarian at the main branch of the New York Public Library, a position that paid well enough to afford her tiny apartment and simple lifestyle, but which required her to spend her days helping people find information while remaining essentially invisible herself. The irony wasn't lost on her. She possessed knowledge and skills that would have made her legendary in certain circles, but she spent her days reshelving books on subjects she had mastered years ago, answering reference questions from graduate students who were studying topics she could have written dissertations on, and dealing with patrons who treated her like a piece of furniture that happened to be able to talk. She had started visiting gyms 6 months ago, not because she needed the training, but because she needed something else. Recognition, perhaps. Acknowledgement that she existed, that she was more than the sum of her unremarkable appearance and quiet demeanor. The first few gyms had been disappointing, too focused on fitness rather than fighting, too sanitized and commercial. But Murphy's was different. Murphy's had real fighters. Men and women who understood what it meant to test yourself against another person's will and skill. Maya finished her dinner and washed the dishes, placing each one in the drying rack with mechanical precision. She moved to her small desk and opened her laptop, beginning to type her analysis of the evening's events. Subject: Marcus Rodriguez. Heavyweight boxer, approximately 220 pounds, 6 feet 4 inches height. Training level: professional, estimated 10 years experience. Approach: overconfident, relied on physical intimidation rather than technique. Initial contact: attempted gentle jabs to establish dominance without causing injury. Response: minimal. Evasion: designed to appear defensive while gathering information about opponent's timing and reach. She paused in her typing, remembering the moment when Marcus had shifted from playful to aggressive. There had been something in his eyes that had reminded her of the businessman in the subway, a moment when his view of her had changed from harmless curiosity to something darker. It was in that moment that Maya had stopped playing defense and decided to end the confrontation. Subject: escalation. increased power and aggression when initial approach failed, switched from educational intent to dominance assertion. Counter strategy: single precision strike to mandibular angle, force applied at optimal vector to induce immediate unconsciousness. Result: complete incapacitation with minimal effort required. Maya saved the document and closed the laptop. She moved to her small bookshelf and withdrew a worn journal bound in cracked leather. This was her grandfather's journal, written in a mixture of Chinese characters and English notes, filled with observations and techniques that had been passed down through generations of his family. She opened to a page she had read hundreds of times, where Chen had written about the responsibility that came with knowledge. To know how to hurt is to know how to heal, he had written. To understand destruction is to understand creation. The student who learns only how to break things has learned nothing at all. Maya understood the philosophy, had spent years studying, not just the martial applications of her grandfather's teachings, but also their healing aspects. She had learned acupuncture and herbal medicine, had studied anatomy and physiology until she could identify every pressure point and nerve pathway in the human body. She could ease pain as easily as she could cause it, could help the body heal as precisely as she could damage it, but understanding and application were different things. Maya had never found a way to use the healing aspects of her knowledge in the same visceral, immediate way that she had learned to use its destructive potential. Healing required trust, required people to believe in her abilities and allow her to help them. Destruction required only opportunity. She closed the journal and prepared for bed, following a routine that had remained unchanged for years. Clothes folded and put away, teeth brushed. A few minutes of meditation, sitting cross-legged on her bed while focusing on her breathing and trying to quiet the restless energy that always seemed to hum beneath her skin. Sleep came reluctantly, filled with dreams of her grandfather and the basement where he had taught her to see the world differently. In her dreams, Chen was always disappointed in her, shaking his head sadly as he watched her use his teachings to hurt rather than heal. She would wake from these dreams with a start, her heart racing and her hands shaking, and it would take her several minutes to remember that she was an adult now, living alone in a world that her grandfather had never fully understood. Maya's alarm went off at 6 a.m., just as it did every morning. Creating these detailed character development scenes requires extensive research and writing time. If you're enjoying Maya's journey and want to see more stories like this, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories. She rose and moved through her morning routine with the same mechanical precision as her evening ritual. Coffee brewed in exact proportions, breakfast prepared with mathematical accuracy, clothes selected for their ability to make her invisible in a crowd. By 8 a.m., she was walking through the doors of the New York Public Library, her small frame disappearing into the sea of tourists and researchers who filled the main reading room. She took her place behind the reference desk and became, once again, just another helpful librarian ready to assist patrons with their research needs. But something was different today. As she helped a graduate student locate sources for his thesis on conflict resolution, Maya found herself thinking about Marcus Rodriguez and the look in his eyes when he had regained consciousness. Not anger, as she had expected, but curiosity. Almost respect. It was a feeling she wasn't used to, and she wasn't sure she liked it. The day passed slowly, filled with the usual parade of reference questions and research requests. Maya answered each inquiry with professional competence, her vast knowledge remaining hidden beneath a facade of helpful librarian efficiency. She recommended books on subjects she had mastered, provided guidance on research methodologies she could have improved upon, and smiled politely at patrons who thanked her and immediately forgot she existed. During her lunch break, Maya walked to a small park near the library and sat on a bench with a sandwich she had prepared that morning. She watched people pass by, businessmen in expensive suits, tourists with cameras, students carrying heavy backpacks, all of them moving through the world with the confidence of people who believed they understood their place in it. Maya envied that confidence. She had spent her entire life existing in the spaces between other people's certainties, never quite belonging anywhere, never quite fitting into any category. Too small to be taken seriously in physical confrontations, too quiet to command attention. In social situations, too unusual to be truly invisible despite her best efforts. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her supervisor at the library, asking if she could work late to help with a special collection inventory. Maya replied that she could, though part of her wanted to say no, wanted to leave work at the normal time and return to Murphy's gym to see what kind of reception awaited her after the previous night's display. But routine was safer than adventure, and Maya had built her life around safety. She finished her sandwich and walked back to the library, ready to spend the rest of her day hidden among the stacks, surrounded by knowledge that she would never be asked to demonstrate. As she worked that evening, alone in the basement archives with rows of carefully cataloged documents, Maya thought about power and its applications. She thought about her grandfather's journal and his writings about responsibility. And she thought about Marcus Rodriguez, wondering if he would be back at the gym the next night, and what he might say if he saw her again. The building grew quiet around her as the evening wore on, the usual daytime sounds replaced by the gentle hum of climate control systems and the occasional creak of settling wood and metal. Maya worked steadily, her movements efficient and precise, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of cataloging and organizing. But in the back of her mind, a small voice was asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. Questions about what she really wanted from her visits to the gym, about whether she was honoring her grandfather's memory or betraying it, and about what it meant to possess knowledge that could change everything while choosing to use it for nothing. The next evening, Maya arrived at Murphy's boxing gym to find the atmosphere completely transformed. Word had spread quickly through the underground fighting community about the previous night's upset, and the gym was packed with fighters, trainers, and curious onlookers who had come to get a glimpse of the woman who had knocked out Thunder Rodriguez with a single punch. Tommy Kowalski stood near the front desk, his weathered face showing the strain of dealing with twice his usual crowd. The gym's capacity was designed for maybe 30 people working out comfortably. But tonight there had to be at least 50 bodies crammed into the space, all talking in excited voices about what they had heard, what they expected to see, and whether the whole thing had been some kind of fluke. "Maya," Tommy called out when he spotted her near the entrance. He pushed through the crowd toward her, his expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Glad you made it. Listen, we need to talk." Maya nodded, following Tommy to his small office behind the main gym floor. The office was cluttered with fight posters, old photographs of Tommy's glory days as an amateur boxer, and stacks of paperwork that suggested the business side of running a gym was significantly less glamorous than the fighting side. Tommy closed the door behind them, muffling the sounds of the crowd outside. "Look," Tommy began, settling into his chair behind a desk that had seen better decades. "I don't know what kind of training you've had, but what happened last night ... That's not normal. Marcus has been boxing professionally for 12 years. He's not some amateur who got lucky in the golden gloves. And you dropped him like he was made of paper." Maya sat in the single chair across from Tommy's desk, her posture straight and attentive. She had expected this conversation, had been preparing for it during the train ride from Manhattan. "I told you, my grandfather taught me." "Yeah, about that." Tommy leaned forward, his pale blue eyes studying Maya's face intently. "I did some asking around today. Called some contacts, reached out to people who might know about trainers working with traditional martial arts in the city. Nobody's heard of you. Nobody knows any Chen Wei who was teaching the kind of skills you displayed last night." Maya remained silent, her expression unchanged. She had learned long ago that saying nothing was often more powerful than trying to. Explain things people weren't ready to understand. Tommy sighed, running his hands through his thinning gray hair. Listen, I'm not trying to interrogate you. But I've got a business to run here, and what happened last night has people talking. Some of them are saying you've got professional training that you're not disclosing. Others think maybe you caught Marcus with a lucky shot when he wasn't taking you seriously. And some ... He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Some are saying that what you did isn't possible without chemical enhancement. You think I'm using drugs? Maya asked quietly. I think I don't know what to think, Tommy replied. Honestly, all I know is that in 30 years of running this gym, I've never seen anything like what you did. And now I've got fighters coming in here asking to spar with you, not because they want to learn something, but because they want to prove that whatever happened was a fluke. Through the office window, Maya could see the crowd on the gym floor. Many of the faces were familiar from the previous night, but there were new ones as well. She spotted several fighters she recognized from local fight cards, men who had reputations for being particularly aggressive or difficult to handle. Their body language suggested they weren't here out of casual curiosity. What do you want me to do? Maya asked. Tommy leaned back in his chair, studying her with the expression of a man trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. I want you to be honest with me. Are you a professional fighter? Do you have training that goes beyond what you've told me? Because if you do, I need to know about it before I let you step into that ring again. Maya considered her options. She could lie, make up a story about training at some private gym that had since closed, or claim to have learned from instructional videos and natural talent. She could tell the truth, though she knew from experience that the truth was often harder to believe than a comfortable lie. Or she could simply leave, find another gym in another part of the city, and start over again. My grandfather was not a professional trainer, she said finally. He was an herbalist who ran a small shop in Chinatown. But his family had been martial artists in China for many generations, and he taught me what he knew. The techniques I use are very old, much older than modern boxing or mixed martial arts. Traditional kung fu? Tommy asked, though his tone suggested he was still skeptical. Something like that, Maya replied, knowing that any attempt to explain the true nature of her grandfather's teachings would only make her sound delusional. The point is, I'm not hiding professional fighting experience, and I'm certainly not using any kind of enhancement. I'm just very good at what I do. Tommy stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. I believe you're not lying to me, even if I don't fully understand what you're telling me. But here's the situation. I've got a gym full of fighters who want to test themselves against you, and some of them aren't going to be as easygoing as Marcus was. If you want to keep training here, you need to be prepared for the fact that word is going to keep spreading, and the quality of your opposition is going to keep increasing. I can handle myself, Maya said simply. I hope so, Tommy replied, though his expression suggested he had serious doubts. Because I've got a feeling tonight is going to be a lot more interesting than last night. They returned to the main gym floor, where the crowd had grown even larger. Maya noticed that several people were openly filming with their phones now, and she recognized Sarah Martinez setting up her camera equipment near the main ring. The atmosphere felt different from the previous night, less casual curiosity and more electric anticipation. Marcus Rodriguez was there, sitting on a bench near the ring with an ice pack pressed to his jaw. He looked up when Maya approached, and she saw that the confusion from the previous night had been replaced by something that looked like grudging respect mixed with professional interest. How are you feeling? Maya asked. Marcus moved his jaw experimentally, then shrugged. I felt better. But I've also felt worse. You've got a hell of a right hand. Thank you. Marcus studied her for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. Listen, I've been thinking about what happened, and I want another shot. Not tonight, my head's still a little fuzzy, but soon. I was being careless, not taking you seriously. I'd like to see what happens when I'm actually trying. Maya nodded. Whenever you're ready. Before Marcus could respond, a voice cut through the crowd noise like a blade through silk. So you're the little woman who thinks she can fight. The speaker was a man Maya didn't recognize, though his reputation preceded him into the gym like a dark cloud. Vincent Viper Castellano stood about 6'1" with the lean, dangerous build of a middleweight who had spent most of his career fighting above his natural weight class. His dark hair was slicked back with too much product, and his brown eyes held the flat, predatory stare of someone who enjoyed hurting people a little too much. Tommy moved quickly to intercede. Vincent, we weren't expecting you tonight. Vincent ignored Tommy completely, his gaze fixed on Maya with the intensity of a snake sizing up potential prey. I heard some interesting stories about what happened here last night. Figured I'd come see for myself if there was any truth to them. Maya studied Vincent's stance, his body language, the way he held his shoulders. Everything about him radiated controlled violence, the kind of barely contained aggression that made her grandfather's warnings about necessary versus unnecessary conflict echo in her memory. This man didn't want to test his skills against hers. He wanted to hurt her, to prove something to himself and the watching crowd. I'm here to train, not to put on a show, Maya said quietly. Vincent's laugh was harsh and unpleasant. Training? Sweetheart, if you want to train, go take a Zumba class. This is a real gym for real fighters, not some fantasy camp for people who watch too many movies. The crowd had formed a loose circle around them now, the energy in the room shifting from excited anticipation to something darker and more dangerous. Maya could see Tommy's face growing red with anger, but she also noticed that several of the other fighters were nodding in agreement with Vincent's words. Whatever respect she had earned the previous night was fragile, built on a single moment that many people were still willing to dismiss as luck or fluke. Jake Morrison stepped forward from the crowd, his Irish accent making his words sound more reasonable than they were. Come on, Vincent. The lady proved herself last night. No need to be a prick about it. Vincent's head swiveled toward Jake like a turret tracking a target. Did she? Or did Marcus just have an off night? Maybe got distracted by those cameras. Maybe wasn't paying attention because he was trying to be a gentleman. He turned back to Maya, his smile showing too many teeth. I'm not a gentleman. I don't get distracted. And I sure as hell don't pull my punches just because my opponent happens to be female. Sarah Martinez had stopped setting up her equipment and was watching the confrontation with the focused attention of someone who sensed a story developing. Her camera hung around her neck, ready to capture whatever happened next, though Maya suspected that whatever Vincent had in mind wouldn't make for the kind of photographs Sarah usually took. Vincent, Tommy tried again, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been running the gym long enough to command respect. You know the rules. No unsanctioned matches, no fights that haven't been agreed to by both parties. If you want to spar with Maya, you ask her politely and you follow the same safety protocols as everyone else. Safety protocols, Vincent repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. Right, because that worked out so well for Marcus. He took a step closer to Maya, close enough that she could smell the stale cigarettes on his breath and see the small scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. Here's the thing, little girl. I don't think you're as tough as you pretend to be. I think you got lucky once, and now you're riding that luck as far as it will take you, but luck runs out. Maya looked around the crowd, seeing the faces of men and women who had been willing to give her the benefit of the doubt the night before, but were now waiting to see how she would handle a direct challenge from someone with Vincent's reputation. She could walk away, leave the gym and find somewhere else to train. Somewhere quieter where she wouldn't have to deal with men like Vincent Castellano. But walking away would mean accepting that her grandfather's teachings were something to be hidden, something shameful that she should use only in desperate circumstances. It would mean going back to her invisible life, her quiet existence where nobody knew what she was capable of and nobody cared. "All right," Maya said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room like a bell through fog. "Let's do this." Tommy's face went pale. "Maya, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Vincent's got a reputation for—" "I know what kind of reputation he has," Maya interrupted, her dark eyes never leaving Vincent's face. "And I know what I'm doing." Vincent's smile widened into something that had nothing to do with humor. "That's what I like to hear. Tommy, set it up. Full contact, no headgear, no time limits. We go until one of us can't continue." "Absolutely not," Tommy said firmly. "This is a gym, not a back alley fight club. If you want to spar, we do it properly. Regulation rounds, proper safety equipment, referee to stop it if things get out of hand." Vincent looked like he was about to argue, but Maya spoke first. 3 2-minute rounds, minimal protective gear. Standard boxing rules." She paused, considering. "But if you want to make it more interesting, we can add a stakes." The room grew quiet enough that Maya could hear the traffic outside on the street. Vincent's eyebrows rose slightly, his expression shifting from predatory confidence to genuine curiosity. "What kind of stakes?" Maya moved closer to Vincent, close enough to speak in a voice that only he could hear clearly. "If I win, you leave this gym and don't come back. Ever." Vincent's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "And if I win?" "You won't," Maya said simply, but loud. Enough for the crowd to hear. The reaction was immediate and electric. Fighters began talking excitedly among themselves, some placing informal bets on the outcome, others debating whether Maya was incredibly confident or simply suicidal. Vincent's reputation in the local fighting scene was well established. He was known for being technically skilled, physically powerful, and completely ruthless in his willingness to hurt opponents. Tommy tried one more time to talk them out of it. "This is a bad idea. Vincent, you've got 30 pounds on her and 6 inches of reach. Maya, I don't care how good your grandfather was. This man has been fighting professionally for 8 years. "Then it should be over quickly," Maya replied. Already moving toward the ring, the next 20 minutes were spent in preparation. That felt more like the build-up to a prize fight than a gym sparring session. Word had spread to other gyms in the area, and Maya could see new faces arriving every few minutes, drawn by text messages and phone calls announcing that something significant was about to happen at Murphy's. She sat quietly in a corner, going through her pre-fight routine while Vincent held court near the opposite side of the gym, surrounded by admirers and hangers-on who were eager to associate themselves with what they assumed would be a dominant victory. Maya ignored the crowd, focusing instead on her breathing and the subtle adjustments her body was making as it prepared for combat. Sarah Martinez approached during the preparation period, her camera hanging around her neck but her notebook in her hand. "Maya, can I ask you a few questions before this starts?" Maya looked up at the photographer, seeing genuine concern mixed with professional curiosity in the woman's eyes. "What would you like to know? Are you sure about this?" "Vincent has a history of taking things too far. He's been suspended from several amateur organizations for excessive aggression, and there are rumors that he deliberately tries to injure sparring partners." Maya nodded. "I appreciate the warning, but I can take care of myself." Sarah studied Maya's face for a moment, then asked the question that had been bothering her since the previous night. "Last night, when you knocked out Marcus, I've photographed a lot of fights and I've never seen anything quite like that. The precision of it, the way you moved through his defenses like they weren't even there. Where did that come from?" Maya considered how to answer. She had grown tired of the grandfather explanation, partly because it was incomplete and partly because nobody seemed to believe it anyway. "Have you ever studied physics?" she asked finally. Sarah blinked, caught off guard by the seemingly unrelated question. "A little, in college." then you understand that every system has points of vulnerability. Places where a small force, properly applied, can create much larger effects. Maya stood up, beginning to wrap her hands with the methodical precision that had become second nature. The human body is just a system like any other. Most people don't understand its vulnerabilities because they're taught to think of fighting as a contest of strength against strength. But strength is often irrelevant if you know where and how to apply pressure. Sarah wrote quickly, trying to capture Maya's words exactly. "And your grandfather taught you these pressure points?" "He taught me to see," Maya replied. "Everything else is just application." Before Sarah could ask another question, Tommy called for the fighters to enter the ring. The crowd pressed closer to the ropes as Maya and Vincent climbed through opposite corners. Vincent had stripped down to boxing shorts and was shadowboxing with fluid, dangerous movements that showed off his technical skill and physical conditioning. Maya wore the same loose gym clothes as the previous night, and her preparation consisted of standing perfectly still in her corner, while focusing on Vincent's movements. The contrast was striking enough that several people in the crowd began to reconsider their assumptions about the fight's likely outcome. Vincent looked like a fighter, all coiled muscle and barely contained violence. Maya looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. Tommy climbed into the ring to serve as referee, though his expression made it clear he would rather be anywhere else. "All right, listen up. This is a sparring match, not a street fight. No hits to the back of the head, no low blows, no holding and hitting. If I tell you to break, you break immediately. If I stop the fight, it's over. Understood?" Both fighters nodded, though Vincent's nod was accompanied by a predatory smile that suggested he had his own interpretation of the rules. "Touch gloves and come out fighting," Tommy said, backing toward a neutral corner. Vincent extended his gloves toward Maya in the traditional show of sportsmanship, but as their hands touched, he leaned forward and whispered something that was meant for her ears alone. "I'm going to break you into pieces, little girl. And I'm going to take my time doing it." Maya looked into his eyes and saw something that reminded her of every bully she had ever encountered. Every man who had assumed that her small size and quiet demeanor made her an easy target. She had learned long ago that people like Vincent were fundamentally predictable. Their need to dominate and intimidate blinded them to everything else. "We'll see," she replied quietly. The bell rang, and Vincent came out of his corner like a man with serious intent. Unlike Marcus, who had approached the previous night's match with playful confidence, Vincent moved with the focused aggression of someone who genuinely wanted to hurt his opponent. His opening combination was fast and hard, a double jab followed by a straight right hand that carried enough power to end the fight if it landed cleanly. Maya slipped the combination with movements so minimal they seemed almost accidental, but she could feel the wind from Vincent's punches as they passed inches from her face. Vincent reset quickly, his footwork smooth and professional as he cut off her angles and forced her toward the ropes. The crowd was loud now, voices calling out encouragement and advice to both fighters. Maya could hear Tommy shouting for them to keep it clean, Sarah's camera clicking rapidly as she captured the action, and dozens of other voices blending into a wall of sound that seemed to press in from all directions. Vincent threw another combination, this one with more venom behind it, a jab to set up range, a left hook aimed at Maya's temple, and a straight right hand that was intended to put her on the canvas. Maya moved through the attacks like water, flowing around stones, her body swaying and bending in ways that seemed to defy the basic mechanics of human movement. But this time, instead of simply evading, Maya countered. Her response was almost too quick to follow. As Vincent's right hand extended in his power shot, Maya stepped inside his reach and drove her elbow upward into his solar plexus with surgical precision. The impact drove the air from Vincent's lungs in a sharp gasp, and his eyes went wide with surprise and pain. Before he could recover, Maya followed up with a short uppercut to his liver, a punch that traveled less than 6 inches but landed with the accuracy of a guided missile. Vincent doubled over involuntarily, his body responding to nerve signals that bypassed his conscious control entirely. The crowd's noise changed pitch, shifting from excitement to something approaching awe. Maya had landed 2 devastating shots in the space of perhaps half a second, and Vincent, who had entered the ring confident of his ability to dominate a much smaller opponent, was already in serious trouble. Vincent straightened with visible effort, his face pale but his eyes filled with a rage that bordered on madness. He had built his reputation on his ability to intimidate and overpower opponents, and having a woman less than half his size hurt him so easily was a humiliation he couldn't accept. He came forward again, this time abandoning any pretense of technique in favor of raw aggression. His punches came in wild, looping swings that carried tremendous power, but left him hopelessly off balance. Maya moved through the assault like a dancer, her footwork carrying her away from danger while her eyes catalogued Vincent's weaknesses with clinical detachment. Vincent's next attack was an overhand right that would have decapitated a normal opponent, but Maya wasn't there when it arrived. She had slipped to her left and slightly forward, positioning herself perfectly for a counterpunch that she delivered with the precision of a surgeon and the power of a sledgehammer. Her right hand connected with the nerve cluster just below Vincent's left ear, a target so specific and vulnerable that most fighters didn't even know it existed. Vincent's legs went out from under him immediately, and he crashed to the canvas with a sound like a falling tree. The gym fell silent except for the sound of Vincent's labored breathing and the soft shuffle of Maya's feet as she moved back to a neutral corner. Tommy began the count, though it was clear from Vincent's glassy eyes and slack expression that he wouldn't be getting up before 8. 10. Tommy raised Maya's hand in victory, though she barely seemed to notice. Her attention was focused on Vincent, who was slowly regaining consciousness with the help of 2 cornermen, who had climbed into the ring to check on him. The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers, shocked exclamations, and heated arguments about what they had just witnessed. Some of the fighters were already pulling out their phones, recording videos as they described the fight to people who hadn't been there. Others stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had seen. Sarah Martinez lowered her camera, her hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline of capturing something truly extraordinary began to wear off. She had photographed dozens of fights, but she had never seen anything like the clinical precision with which Maya had dismantled an opponent who should have held every possible advantage. Maya climbed down from the ring and began unwrapping her hands, ignoring the crowd that was pressing in around her with questions and demands for explanations. Vincent was sitting up now, though his eyes were still unfocused and he seemed confused about where he was or what had happened. Jake Morrison pushed through the crowd to reach Maya's side. "Jesus Christ, Maya, where did you learn to do that?" Maya finished unwrapping her hands and looked around the gym at the faces surrounding her. Some showed respect, others fear, and a few displayed the kind of predatory interest that suggested she had solved one problem only to create several others. "I need some air," she said quietly, gathering her bag and moving toward the exit. Tommy intercepted her before she could reach the door. "Maya, wait, we need to talk about what just happened." Maya paused, looking back at the ring where Vincent was finally being helped to his feet. "What about it? That wasn't a normal knockout. Hell, that wasn't even a normal fight. You put down a professional fighter with 2 punches, and you made it look easy." Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. "People are going to want answers. They're going to want to know how you did it, where you learned it, and whether you're planning to do it again." Maya shouldered her bag and headed for the door. "Tell them the truth," she said over her shoulder. "Tell them I'm nobody special. I just know how to see what other people miss." As she pushed through the exit door and into the cool night air, Maya could hear the excited conversations continuing behind her. She knew that by tomorrow, word of what had happened would have spread throughout the underground fighting community. She knew that Vincent Castellano's humiliation would draw attention from people who were far more dangerous and far more skilled than he had been. But for the first time in years, Maya found herself looking forward to the challenges that lay ahead. The video appeared online 18 hours after Maya's fight with Vincent Castellano. Sarah Martinez had uploaded it to her photography portfolio website with a simple title, "Unknown Fighter Demonstrates Precision Counterpunching." The description was equally understated, mentioning only that the footage showed an exceptional display of technical skill by an amateur fighter during a sparring session at a New York gym. But the internet had its own ideas about what the video represented. Within 6 hours, it had been shared across dozens of fighting forums, martial arts websites, and social media platforms. The comment sections exploded with theories, arguments, and demands for more information about the small woman who had made Vincent Castellano look like a complete amateur. Maya discovered this while sitting at her desk in the New York Public Library, where she was helping a graduate student research primary sources for a thesis on urban development patterns. The student had mentioned seeing an incredible fight video online, and curiosity had compelled Maya to check her phone during her lunch break. Chen sparring highlights had already been viewed over 200,000 times on various platforms. The comments ranged from technical analysis by martial arts experts to wild speculation about her background and training. Several professional fighters had shared the video with commentary, questioning whether what they were seeing was even real. Maya closed the browser and slipped her phone back into her pocket, trying to focus on the afternoon's reference inquiries. But she could feel something changing around her, a subtle shift in the way people looked at her, as if some of them were beginning to recognize her face from the video. That was spreading across the internet like wildfire. By the time she left work that evening, #MayaSin was trending on social media. The entrance to Murphy's boxing gym was crowded with people who clearly didn't belong there. Maya could see news vans from 2 local television stations parked on the street, their satellite dishes extended like mechanical flowers reaching toward the sky. Reporters with microphones stood near the gym's entrance, interviewing anyone who would talk to them about the mysterious fighter who had become an overnight sensation. Maya circled the block twice before finding a side entrance that Tommy had shown her during her first visit. She slipped through the back door and found herself in the storage room where the gym kept spare equipment and cleaning supplies. The muffled sounds of conversation and activity from the main gym floor suggested that the crowd inside was even larger than the one gathered outside. "Maya!" Tommy's voice carried relief and exhaustion in equal measure. He appeared in the doorway of the storage room, his weathered face showing the strain of dealing with the media circus that had erupted around his small gym. "Thank God you're here. It's been absolute chaos since that video went viral." Maya followed Tommy through a maze of equipment toward his office, passing close enough to the main gym floor to see that it was packed with people. She recognized some faces from the previous nights, but there were many more that were completely unfamiliar. Men and women in expensive athletic wear who had the polished look of people more accustomed to fitness clubs than serious fighting. Gyms. Tommy closed his office door behind them and collapsed into his chair with a heavy sigh. "I've had 15 reporters call today asking for interviews. 3 different television shows want to feature you on their programs. There's a documentary filmmaker who flew in from Los Angeles specifically to ask if he can follow you around with cameras, and that's just the media." Maya sat down across from Tommy's desk, noting the stack of business cards and contact information that had accumulated since the previous evening. What else? Fight promoters, agents, people claiming to represent various martial arts organizations who want to verify your credentials or offer you sponsorship deals. Tommy rubbed his temples as if trying to massage away a headache. I've also had calls from 3 different law enforcement agencies asking questions about you and whether what they saw in the video represents some kind of enhanced human performance that they should know about. Maya blinked in surprise. Law enforcement? Apparently, when someone demonstrates the kind of precision striking that you showed last night, it raises questions in certain circles about whether you might have military or intelligence training that you're not disclosing. Tommy leaned forward, his expression serious. Maya, I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you connected to any government agencies? Are you some kind of undercover operative or special forces veteran? Maya almost laughed at the absurdity of the question, but Tommy's expression made it clear that he was completely serious. I'm a librarian, Tommy. I live alone in a tiny apartment in Chinatown and spend my days helping people research academic papers. The most dangerous thing I do at work is climbing a ladder to reach books on high shelves. Tommy studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I believe you. But the problem is, other people aren't going to be so easily convinced. That video has been analyzed frame by frame by people who know what they're looking at, and they're saying that what you did shouldn't be possible without years of specialized training. Through the office window, Maya could see the crowd on the gym floor growing more restless. Several people were openly filming with their phones, presumably hoping to capture additional footage of her if she appeared. The atmosphere felt less like a gym and more like a media event waiting to happen. There's something else, Tommy continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. I got a call this afternoon from someone claiming to represent Vincent Castellano's management team. They're saying that Vincent was chemically impaired during the fight, that he had taken prescription medication that affected his performance. They want a rematch under more controlled conditions. Maya felt a flicker of anger at the implication. Vincent wasn't impaired. He was overconfident and technically sloppy. That's why he lost. I know that, and you know that, but his people are spinning it differently. They're saying that no one could have done what you did to a fighter of Vincent's caliber without some kind of unfair advantage. Tommy paused, choosing his words carefully. They're also suggesting that if you refuse the rematch, it will prove that you can't repeat your performance under scrutiny. Maya considered this for a moment. She had hoped that embarrassing Vincent would end his harassment, but apparently, it had only escalated the situation. Now she was dealing not just with his wounded pride, but with the professional interests of people who made money from his fighting career. What kind of rematch are they proposing? Tommy pulled out a folder filled with paperwork and contract templates. Professional sanctioned bout. Proper medical supervision. Drug testing for both fighters, official referees, and judges. They want to hold it at Madison Square Garden as an undercard fight for a major boxing event next month. Maya stared at the paperwork in disbelief. 3 days ago, she had been an anonymous librarian whose biggest excitement was helping college students find obscure research sources. Now she was being offered professional fights at one of the most famous venues in the world. Tommy, I'm not a professional fighter. I don't have a manager or a training team or any of the things you need for that level of competition. That's what I told them, Tommy replied. But they said they don't care about your official credentials. The video has generated enough public interest that they're willing to fast-track your professional licensing if you agree to the fight. Before Maya could respond, there was a sharp knock on the office door. Tommy called for whoever it was to enter, and Sarah Martinez stepped inside, her camera bag slung over her shoulder and her notebook in her hand. I'm sorry to interrupt, Sarah said, but there are some people here who insist on speaking with Maya. They say they're from the Athletic Commission. Maya and Tommy exchanged glances. Professional athletic commissions were the regulatory bodies that oversaw sanctioned fights, and their interest in Maya could mean anything from routine inquiry to serious investigation. Send them in, Tommy said reluctantly. 2 men in expensive suits entered the small office, making the already cramped space feel claustrophobic. The first was tall and thin with prematurely gray hair and the kind of pale complexion that suggested he spent most of his time indoors. The second was shorter and stockier, with the scarred knuckles and slightly flattened nose of someone who had spent time in the ring himself. "Miss Chen," the tall man said, extending his hand in greeting. "I'm David Richardson from the New York State Athletic Commission. This is my colleague, Frank Torino. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your recent sparring activities." Maya shook both men's hands, noting that Frank's grip lingered slightly longer than necessary, as if he were testing her strength or looking for some sign of the power she had displayed in the video. "What would you like to know?" Maya asked. David Richardson opened a thin briefcase and withdrew a tablet computer, which he used to pull up the video of Maya's fight with Vincent. "We've reviewed this footage several times, and we have some concerns about what we're seeing. Specifically, we're wondering about the techniques you used and where you learned them." Maya glanced at Tommy, who nodded encouragingly. "My grandfather taught me." Frank Torino spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of someone who had taken too many shots to the throat during his fighting career. "Miss Chen, I've been involved in combat sports for over 20 years. I've trained with world champions, worked with Olympic athletes, and seen every style of fighting that exists. What you did in this video doesn't match any recognized martial art or fighting system that I'm familiar with." Maya remained quiet, waiting to see where the conversation was heading. David Richardson manipulated the tablet to show the fight in slow motion, focusing on the moment when Maya had countered Vincent's attack with her elbow and uppercut combination. "These strikes are incredibly precise, targeting specific nerve clusters and pressure points that most fighters don't even know exist. The accuracy required to land these shots on a moving target suggests a level of training that takes decades to develop. And yet," Frank added, "we can't find any record of you training at any recognized martial arts school, competing in any tournaments, or holding rank in any traditional fighting system. It's as if you learned these techniques in a vacuum." Maya realized that she was being interrogated, though the men were being polite about it. They suspected that her abilities came from sources they couldn't identify or verify, and that made them uncomfortable from a regulatory standpoint. "Gentlemen," Tommy interjected, "Maya has been training at my gym for several months now. I've watched her work out, seen her technique development, and I can vouch for the fact that she's a legitimate martial artist." David Richardson nodded diplomatically. "We're not questioning Ms. Chen's legitimacy, Mr. Kowalski. We're simply trying to understand the nature of her training, so we can properly classify her for regulatory purposes. If she wants to compete professionally, we need to know what we're dealing with." Maya looked around the small office at the faces surrounding her. Tommy's concerned support, Sarah's journalistic curiosity, and the 2 officials' professional skepticism. She realized that her grandfather's warnings about the responsibilities that came with knowledge were becoming more relevant every day. "My grandfather's family practiced traditional Chinese martial arts for many generations," she said finally. "The techniques I use are very old, passed down through oral tradition rather than formal schools. They focus on understanding human anatomy and using minimal force to achieve maximum effect." Frank Torino leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. "What style specifically? Wing Chun? White Crane? Mattis?" Maya shook her head. "It wasn't called any particular style. My grandfather simply called it understanding the body. The techniques are based on pressure points, nerve clusters, and the body's natural vulnerabilities." David Richardson made notes on his tablet. "Would it be possible for us to observe a demonstration of these techniques? Under controlled conditions, of course." Before Maya could answer, the office door burst open and Jake Morrison stuck his head inside, his Irish accent thick with excitement. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see what's happening out there. There's someone here who claims he knows. Maya, Tommy stood up with a sigh. Jake, we're in the middle of an important meeting. Tommy, trust me on this one, Jake interrupted. This guy says he trained with Maya's grandfather, and he's got some things to say that I think everyone needs to hear. Maya felt her stomach drop. In the 15 years since Chen Wei's death, she had never encountered anyone else who claimed to have learned his techniques. Her grandfather had been very secretive about his past, and Maya had always assumed she was the only person he had taught. The group filed out of Tommy's office and onto the main gym floor, where the crowd had formed a loose circle around an elderly Asian man who looked to be in his 70s. He was small and slightly built, with silver hair and the kind of weathered hands that spoke of a lifetime of manual labor. When he saw Maya approaching, his face broke into a smile of recognition. "Zhao Maya," he said in accented English, using the diminutive form of her name that only her grandfather had ever called her. "I wondered when I would finally meet Chen Wei's granddaughter." Maya stared at the man, searching her memory for any mention of him in her grandfather's stories. "I'm sorry, but I don't know who you are." The elderly man nodded understandingly. "My name is Liu Heiken. Your grandfather and I trained together many years ago, before we both came to America. When I saw the video of your sparring match, I recognized the techniques immediately. Chen Wei always said he would pass on the family knowledge to someone worthy." David Richardson stepped forward, his tablet ready to record the conversation. "Mr. Liu, you're saying that you're familiar with the fighting techniques Ms. Chen demonstrated?" Liu Heiken looked at the officials with the kind of amused expression that elderly people sometimes reserve for younger individuals who think they understand more than they actually do. "Familiar? Young man, I helped develop some of those techniques. The Chen family style that Maya practices is over 300 years old, but it has been adapted and refined by each generation." Frank Torino's skepticism was evident in his voice. 300 years? That would predate most recognized martial arts systems. "Most recognized Western martial arts systems," Liu corrected gently. "The techniques that Chen Wei taught his granddaughter come from a time when martial arts were not about sport or competition. They were about survival." Maya felt as if the ground were shifting beneath her feet. In all the years she had studied her grandfather's teachings, she had never fully understood their historical context or their connection to a larger martial tradition. Chen Wei had been vague about his past, speaking in general terms about his family's knowledge without providing specific details. "Mr. Liu," Maya said carefully, "if you knew my grandfather, then you know that he was very secretive about these techniques. He never mentioned training partners or other practitioners." Liu Heiken nodded sadly. "Chen Wei had good reasons to be secretive. The knowledge we carry has been misused in the past, turned into weapons for people who did not understand the philosophy behind the techniques. Your grandfather and I made a pact when we came to America. We would only teach the true methods to family members who could be trusted with such responsibility." Sarah Martinez had been recording the conversation with her phone, but now she lowered it and spoke up. "What kind of philosophy?" Liu Heiken gestured toward Maya. "Show them the meditation form, child. Let them see that what you practice is not just about fighting." Maya hesitated. The meditation form was something her grandfather had taught her in private, a series of slow, flowing movements that were designed to cultivate internal awareness and control. It was deeply personal, and she had never performed it in front of an audience, but she could see that the crowd was waiting, that this moment represented some kind of turning point in how her abilities would be perceived and understood. Slowly, Maya moved to the center of the main gym floor and began the sequence. Her grandfather had taught her 20 years earlier. The movements were unlike anything most of the observers had seen before. Maya's body flowed through positions that seemed to combine elements of Tai Chi, Qigong, and dance, but with an underlying precision that suggested each gesture had a specific purpose. Her breathing became deep and rhythmic, and her expression took on a quality of serene focus that transformed her entire presence. As she moved through the form, Liu Heiken provided quiet commentary. Each position strengthened specific muscle groups while teaching awareness of pressure points and energy channels. The breathing techniques increase oxygen efficiency and help regulate the nervous system. The mental focus required to perform the form correctly is the same focus needed to apply the fighting techniques with precision. When Maya finished the sequence, the gym was completely silent. Even the most skeptical observers had been affected by the demonstration, recognizing that they had witnessed something that went far beyond simple physical technique. David Richardson cleared his throat. "Mr. Liu, are you saying that Ms. Chen's abilities come from a legitimate martial arts tradition with documented history?" "I am saying that Maya Chen is the inheritor of knowledge that has been carefully preserved and passed down through many generations," Liu replied. "Her grandfather chose her as his successor because he recognized in her the wisdom and restraint necessary to use such techniques responsibly." Frank Torino looked between Maya and Liu Heiken with an expression that suggested his worldview was undergoing some significant adjustments. "And you can verify this? Provide documentation or testimony that would satisfy regulatory requirements?" Liu Heiken smiled. "Young man, some things are more important than your regulatory requirements. But yes, I can provide whatever verification you need to confirm that Maya's training is legitimate and traditional." Tommy stepped forward, looking relieved to finally have some concrete answers about Maya's background. "So we can put all the conspiracy theories and speculation to rest. Maya's not some government operative or enhanced human experiment. She's a traditional martial artist carrying on her family's heritage." "Not quite," Liu Heiken said, his expression growing more serious. "Maya's training is traditional, yes, but what she can do with it is extraordinary even by the standards of our lineage. Most practitioners of the Chen family methods spend their entire lives learning to apply a few techniques with the kind of precision Maya demonstrated in that video. She has mastered in 20 years what takes most people 40 or 50 years to achieve." Maya felt uncomfortable being discussed as if she weren't present, but she could see that Liu Heiken's testimony was having the desired effect on the officials. David Richardson and Frank Torino were exchanging glances that suggested they were satisfied with the explanations they had received. "Mr. Liu," David said, "would you be willing to serve as a character witness for Ms. Chen if she decides to pursue professional licensing? Your testimony could help streamline the regulatory process." Liu Heiken looked at Maya with an expression that seemed to be asking for her permission. "That would depend on what Maya wants to do with her abilities. The techniques she has mastered were not originally intended for sport or entertainment." All eyes turned to Maya, and she realized that she was standing at a crossroads that would determine the direction of her entire life. The crowd of fighters, reporters, officials, and curious onlookers were all waiting to hear what she would say about her intentions and her future. Maya thought about her grandfather and the lessons he had taught her about responsibility. She thought about her quiet life as a librarian and the safety of anonymity. She thought about Vincent Castellano and Marcus Rodriguez and all the other fighters who had underestimated her because of her size and gender. "I want to understand what I'm capable of," she said finally. "And I want other people to understand that strength doesn't always come from where you expect it." Sarah Martinez stepped forward, her journalist instincts sensing a story that could define her career. "Maya, does this mean you're accepting the rematch with Vincent Castellano?" Maya looked around the gym at the faces surrounding her, some friendly, some skeptical, some calculating the potential profit or prestige that could come from association with her abilities. She realized that her days of invisibility were over, regardless of what she decided to do next. "Yes," she said simply. "I accept." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Fighters began talking excitedly among themselves about the implications of a professional bout between Maya and Vincent. Reporters started making phone calls to their editors, recognizing that they had just witnessed the announcement of what could become one of the most unusual and heavily covered fights in recent memory. David Richardson approached Maya with his business card extended. "Miss Chen, I'll need to schedule you for a comprehensive evaluation before we can approve your professional license. Medical examination, drug testing, skills assessment, the full process. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" Maya nodded. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow morning, if you're available. The sooner we can complete the evaluation, the sooner we can finalize the match details." Frank Torino added, "You'll also need to start thinking about representation. Professional fighters need managers, trainers, legal advisors. The business side of this sport can be just as challenging as the physical competition." Tommy stepped in before Maya could respond. "I'd be honored to serve as Maya's trainer for this fight. And I know some people who can help with the management and legal aspects." Liu Heiken moved closer to Maya, his voice dropping to a level that only she could hear. "Child, are you certain this is the path you want to take? Once you step into that world, there will be no going back to the quiet life you have known." Maya considered the question for a long moment. The old man was right. Accepting the professional fight would change everything about her existence. The anonymity she had treasured, the peaceful routine of her library work, the simple apartment where she could practice her grandfather's teachings in solitude, all of that would be lost. But she thought about the years she had spent hiding her abilities, denying the full extent of what her grandfather had taught her, allowing people to overlook and underestimate her because it seemed safer than standing out. She thought about all the times she had watched injustice occur and done nothing because drawing attention to herself felt too dangerous. "I'm certain," she said. Liu Heiken nodded slowly, though his expression suggested he had mixed feelings about her decision. "Then I will help you prepare. The techniques your grandfather taught you are powerful, but using them in a professional setting will require adaptations and strategies that he may not have covered." Sarah Martinez had been documenting the entire conversation, and now she approached Maya with a request that seemed almost anticlimactic after everything that had just transpired. "Maya, would you be willing to sit for a formal interview? I think your story deserves to be told properly, with context and depth rather than just the sensational aspects that people are focusing on." Maya agreed, recognizing that controlling the narrative around her abilities might be crucial to how she was perceived by the public and by potential opponents. They arranged to meet the following evening after Maya had completed her evaluation with the athletic commission. As the crowd began to disperse, Maya found herself standing with Tommy and Liu Heiken near the main ring where everything had started. Just 3 nights earlier, the gym felt different now, charged with possibility and expectation in a way that made the air itself seem electric. "Maya," Tommy said, his weathered face showing a mixture of excitement and concern, "I want you to know what you're getting into. Professional fighting isn't just about technique or even talent. It's about dealing with pressure, managing expectations, and performing when the stakes are higher than anything you've experienced before." Maya looked around the gym that had become the launching point for her transformation from invisible librarian to potential professional fighter. "I understand, but I also know that I can't go back to pretending I'm someone I'm not." Liu Heiken placed a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder. "Your grandfather would be proud of the woman you have become, but he would also remind you that with great ability comes great responsibility. The techniques you possess can heal or harm, create or destroy. The choice of which path to follow will define not just your career, but your character." Maya nodded, understanding that the old man was offering her the same kind of wisdom that Chen Wei had provided throughout her childhood and adolescence. "I'll remember that." As Maya prepared to leave the gym that night, She realized that her life had been fundamentally altered by a chain of events that had begun with her simple desire to test her abilities against real opponents. What had started as curiosity had evolved into something much larger and more complex. The small apartment in Chinatown felt different when she returned home that evening. The books lining her walls, the simple furniture, the quiet routine she had maintained for years, all of it seemed to belong to a different person, someone who had been content to hide her true nature from the world. Maya sat at her small desk and opened her laptop, beginning to research what she could find about professional fighting contracts, media obligations, and the business aspects of combat sports. The technical and philosophical knowledge her grandfather had given her would need to be supplemented with more practical information about navigating an industry she had never seriously considered joining. As she read about training camps, promotional requirements, and the various organizations that sanctioned professional fights, Maya began to understand that accepting the rematch with Vincent Castellano was just the beginning. If she performed well, there would be other opponents, other challenges, and inevitably, other people who would want to prove themselves against the small woman who had somehow mastered techniques that seemed to defy conventional understanding. Her phone buzzed with notifications, text messages from reporters requesting interviews, social media mentions from people sharing opinions about her abilities, and missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. The world was already beginning to intrude on her privacy in ways she hadn't anticipated. Maya turned off her phone and spent the rest of the evening practicing the meditation form that Lou Heiken had asked her to demonstrate. The slow, flowing movements helped center her mind and remind her of the deeper philosophical foundations underlying her grandfather's teachings. As she moved through the ancient sequences, Maya reflected on the conversation with Lou Heiken and his warnings about the responsibilities that came with her abilities. She understood that becoming a professional fighter would put her techniques on display for the world to see, potentially inspiring others to seek out similar training or to misuse whatever they might learn. But she also understood that hiding her abilities had its own costs. For too many years, she had allowed people to dismiss or ignore her, had accepted that her contributions to the world would remain invisible and unacknowledged. The opportunity to demonstrate that strength and power could come in unexpected forms felt like a chance to honor her grandfather's legacy in a way that simple preservation of his techniques could never achieve. Maya finished her practice and prepared for bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring the first formal steps toward a professional fighting career she had never planned or anticipated. The medical evaluations, drug tests, and skills assessments would determine whether she could officially compete at the level her abilities suggested she was capable of reaching. As she lay in bed that night, Maya's mind wandered to her grandfather and the basement of his herb shop, where he had first taught her to see the human body as a complex system of vulnerabilities and strengths. Chen had been preparing her for something, though she doubted he had ever imagined it would lead to professional fights in major venues. The last thought that crossed her mind before sleep was a question that would follow her into her dreams. What would her grandfather think of the path she was choosing? And would he approve of her decision to share his family's secrets with the world? 6 weeks later, Maya stood in the tunnel beneath Madison Square Garden, listening to the muffled roar of 20,000 people who had come to witness what the media had dubbed the impossible fight. The main event was still hours away, but the energy in the arena was already electric with anticipation for the undercard bout that had somehow become the evening's most talked about attraction. Tommy Kowalski stood beside her, his weathered hands working nervously with the towel draped over his shoulder. In the weeks since Maya had agreed to the professional rematch with Vincent Castellano, Tommy had thrown himself into preparation with the intensity of a man trying to make up for decades of missed opportunities. He had studied every aspect of Maya's technique, consulted with Lou Heiken about training methods, and somehow managed to secure the best corner team that Maya's modest budget could afford. "How are you feeling?" Tommy asked, though his own nervousness was more apparent than anything Maya might be experiencing. Maya performed a series of gentle stretches, her movements flowing with the same controlled precision she had displayed. "Since childhood, I feel ready." The understatement was typical of Maya's approach to what had become the most scrutinized fight buildup in recent memory. While Vincent Castellano had spent the previous 6 weeks conducting interviews, appearing on talk shows, and generally promoting himself as the victim of a fluke result who was ready to prove his superiority, Maya had largely avoided the media circus, focusing instead on preparation and training. The preparation had been unlike anything she had experienced before. Lou Heiken had moved temporarily to New York to assist with Maya's training, bringing with him knowledge and techniques that even Chen had never shared with his granddaughter. Together, they had worked to adapt the traditional methods for the specific challenges of professional boxing competition. "The techniques your grandfather taught you are perfect for self-defense and street fighting," Liu had explained during one of their early training sessions. "But professional boxing has rules, regulations, and expectations that require certain modifications." Maya had learned to apply her pressure point techniques within the constraints of boxing regulations, finding ways to utilize her anatomical knowledge without employing strikes that would be considered illegal or unsporting. It had been a delicate balance between honoring her grandfather's teachings and adapting them for a very different context. The media attention had been relentless and largely unwelcome. Maya had granted a single extensive interview to Sarah Martinez, who had written a thoughtful piece about the intersection of traditional martial arts and modern combat sports. But most of the media coverage had focused on the spectacle aspects of the fight, rather than the deeper questions about technique, philosophy, and the preservation of ancient knowledge. The betting odds had swung wildly in the weeks leading up to the fight. Initially, most sportsbooks had favored Vincent heavily, assuming that Maya's previous victory had indeed been a fluke that would be corrected under professional conditions. But as more footage emerged of Maya's training sessions, and as Lou Heiken provided additional context about her background and abilities, the odds had shifted dramatically. By fight night, Maya had actually become a slight favorite, though the betting remained volatile as people struggled to evaluate a fighter whose techniques and background were unlike anything they had previously encountered. Vincent's approach to the rematch had been predictably aggressive in terms of promotion and preparation. He had brought in specialist trainers who claimed expertise in defending against unorthodox fighting styles, had undergone extensive video analysis of Maya's techniques, and had publicly promised to end the fight within 3 rounds. "I've studied every frame of footage available," Vincent had told reporters earlier in the week. "I know what she did and how she did it. More importantly, I know how to stop it from happening again." Maya had declined to respond to Vincent's various provocations and predictions, maintaining the same quiet confidence that had characterized her approach throughout the build-up. When pressed by reporters for her own predictions about the fight's outcome, she had simply said, "We'll see what happens." Now standing in the tunnel with the sounds of the arena growing louder above them, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The shy librarian who had first walked into Murphy's boxing gym, seeking only to test her abilities, had evolved into someone who was about to compete on one of the world's biggest stages. The transformation hadn't been entirely comfortable. Maya had been forced to confront aspects of her personality and ambitions that she had kept carefully hidden for most of her adult life. The desire for recognition, the competitive drive, the satisfaction that came from proving doubters wrong. These weren't qualities she had ever associated with her grandfather's philosophical teachings, but they had emerged as central motivations in her new career. Tommy checked his watch and nodded to the commission official who was coordinating the evening schedule. "It's time." Maya's walkout was deliberately understated compared to the elaborate production that Vincent's team had planned for his entrance. She walked to the ring wearing a simple black robe with no flashy graphics or sponsor logos, accompanied only by Tommy and Lou Heiken, who had been granted special permission to serve as an additional corner advisor. The crowd's reaction was a mixture of curiosity, excitement, and skepticism. Maya could see people in the expensive ringside seats, leaning forward to get a better look at the small woman who had somehow earned the right to compete in such a prestigious venue. The atmosphere felt different from anything she had experienced in Tommy's gym, more formal, more commercial, but also charged with an energy that came from thousands of people focusing their attention on a single point. Vincent's entrance was everything Maya's had not been: pyrotechnics, loud music, elaborate lighting, and a processional that seemed designed to intimidate his opponent before the fight even began. Vincent himself looked to be in the best shape of his career, his body clearly reflecting months of intensive training and preparation. As both fighters underwent their final pre-fight preparations in their respective corners, Maya could feel the weight of expectations and attention in a way that was both exhilarating and sobering. She had never competed with so much at stake, not just the outcome of a single fight, but the validation of everything her grandfather had taught her, and everything she had chosen to believe about herself. Lou Heiken leaned close to speak quietly in her ear. Remember what your grandfather taught you about seeing clearly. All the noise, all the lights, all the people watching. None of that changes what you know about the human body and how to apply pressure at the right points. Tommy added his own encouragement. You've prepared for this, Maya. Trust your training and trust yourself. Vincent's got nothing you haven't seen before. The referee called both fighters to the center of the ring for final instructions. Vincent looked confident and aggressive, his eyes holding the same predatory intensity Maya remembered from their first encounter at Murphy's gym. But there was something else there too, a wariness that suggested he had taken the rematch much more seriously than their original sparring session. I want a clean fight, the referee announced to both fighters and the crowd. Protect yourself at all times, obey my commands, and may the best fighter win. Vincent and Maya touched gloves in the traditional display of sportsmanship, though. Vincent's grip lingered slightly longer than necessary as he leaned forward to whisper, "This time is going to be different, little girl." Maya looked into his eyes and saw the same fundamental character she had recognized during their first encounter: the need to dominate, the inability to accept that someone smaller and apparently weaker might possess superior skills, the anger that came from having his assumptions about the world challenged by someone he considered beneath his notice. "We'll see," Maya replied quietly. They returned to their corners for the final moments before the opening bell. Maya sat on her stool and allowed Tommy to check her gloves and mouthguard one final time while Lou Heiken offered last-minute tactical advice. "Vincent will come out aggressively," Lou predicted. "He will try to overwhelm you early, hoping to end the fight before you can establish your timing and distance. Be patient. Let him exhaust himself with wild attacks, then counter when he overextends." The arena had grown quiet in the moments before the bell, 20,000 people holding their collective breath as they waited to see whether Maya's previous victory had been an anomaly or a preview of something extraordinary. The bell rang, and Vincent exploded out of his corner with the fury of a man fighting to reclaim his reputation and his self-respect. His opening combination was faster and more powerful than anything he had thrown during their first encounter, a series of hooks and crosses that would have ended the fight immediately if any of them had connected cleanly. Maya moved through Vincent's assault like smoke, her evasive movements so minimal and precise that she seemed to be dancing around his punches by fractions of inches. The crowd gasped audibly as Vincent's most powerful shots whistled harmlessly past their target, Maya's head and body swaying just enough to avoid contact while remaining close enough to counterattack. But Maya didn't counter immediately. Following Lou Heiken's advice, she spent the first 2 minutes of the round simply observing and evading. allowing Vincent to expend energy while she gathered information about his timing, his patterns, and his physical condition. Vincent grew increasingly frustrated as the round progressed, his combinations becoming wilder and less technical as he tried to land the decisive blow that would prove he was the superior fighter. By the end of the first round, he was breathing hard and showing signs of the fatigue that came from throwing power punches that never found their target. Maya returned to her corner having barely broken a sweat, her breathing still controlled, and her movements still fluid. Tommy and Liu Heiken were both pleased with her performance, but they cautioned her about the rounds to come. "Vincent's going to get desperate," Tommy warned. Desperate fighters are dangerous because they stop following their game plan and start taking risks. Liu Heiken added, "He will try to turn this into a brawl. Do not let him draw you into that kind of fight. Stay technical, stay precise, and wait for your opportunities." The second round began with Vincent attempting to implement a more measured approach, trying to use his reach advantage and boxing technique rather than relying purely on power and aggression. But Maya's defensive skills made it almost impossible for him to land clean shots, and his growing frustration was evident to everyone watching. Midway through the second round, Vincent committed fully to a right cross that he believed would end the fight. The punch carried all of his weight and momentum behind it, the kind of shot that had knocked out several of his previous opponents. Maya saw the punch coming from the moment Vincent began shifting his weight. She slipped to her left, allowing the cross to pass harmlessly over her right shoulder, and then stepped inside Vincent's reach to deliver her counterattack. The combination she threw was almost identical to the one that had ended their first encounter. An elbow to the solar plexus followed by an uppercut to the liver. But this time, the techniques were delivered with the precision and power of someone who had spent 6 weeks refining her approach for exactly the situation. Vincent doubled over from the body shots, his face contorting with pain as his nervous system responded to the pressure Maya had applied to very specific nerve clusters. Before he could recover, Maya followed up with a short right hand to the same spot on his jaw that had knocked him unconscious at Murphy's gym. Vincent went down like a demolished building, his body folding in sections as consciousness left him. The referee immediately waved off the fight, recognizing that Vincent was completely unconscious before he hit the canvas. The arena erupted in a mixture of cheers, gasps, and stunned silence. Maya had not only repeated her victory from the gym, but had done so even more convincingly, on a bigger stage, against an opponent who had spent months preparing specifically to defeat her. Tommy and Liu Heiken rushed into the ring to congratulate Maya, though she seemed almost surprised by the crowd's reaction. The knockout had felt inevitable to her from the moment Vincent had overcommitted to his power punch, but she was beginning to understand that what felt natural to her appeared supernatural to most observers. The post-fight interviews were brief, partly because Vincent required medical attention and partly because Maya was still reluctant to engage extensively with the media. When asked about her performance, she gave simple, direct answers that focused on technique and preparation rather than the spectacle aspects that most reporters wanted to emphasize. "I did what I trained to do," Maya said when asked about the knockout. "Vincent is a skilled fighter, but he approached this fight the same way he approaches all his fights, trying to overpower his opponent rather than outthink them." Sarah Martinez, who had covered the fight for several major publications, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "Maya, what's next? You've now proven your abilities at the professional level. Are you planning to continue fighting?" Maya looked out at the crowd that was still buzzing with excitement over what they had witnessed. Many of these people had paid significant money to see what they expected would be an interesting curiosity, but they had witnessed something that challenged their fundamental assumptions about fighting, about strength, and about the potential for individuals to transcend the apparent limitations of their physical attributes. "I want to keep learning," Maya replied. There are other fighters, other challenges, other opportunities to understand what I'm capable of. In the weeks that followed the Madison Square Garden fight, Maya found herself at the center of a phenomenon that extended far beyond the boxing world. The video of her knockout of Vincent Castellano was viewed millions of times across various platforms, spawning countless discussions about martial arts, female athletes, and the intersection of traditional knowledge with modern competition. More importantly, from Maya's perspective, the fight had opened doors to opportunities she had never imagined. Offers came from fight promoters around the world requesting her participation in events that ranged from traditional boxing to mixed martial arts to specialty exhibitions. Documentary filmmakers wanted to chronicle her training methods and her grandfather's teachings. Universities invited her to speak about the preservation of traditional knowledge in modern contexts. Maya accepted some offers and declined others, guided by her desire to honor her grandfather's memory while exploring the full extent of her capabilities. She established a small training center in partnership with Tommy Kowalski and Lou Heiken, where they began teaching selected students the principles underlying the techniques that had made her famous. The training center was not a commercial venture in the traditional sense. Students were selected based on their character and their commitment to the philosophical aspects of the training, rather than their ability to pay tuition. Maya, Tommy, and Lou Heiken were all determined to avoid the commercialization and exploitation that had corrupted many traditional martial arts. 6 months after the Madison Square Garden fight, Maya found herself back in the basement where her grandfather had first taught her to see the human body as a complex system of strengths and vulnerabilities. The herb shop had been converted into a small museum and training facility, with Lou Heiken serving as both curator and instructor. Maya stood in the exact spot where Chen had demonstrated pressure point techniques on concrete blocks, where he had taught her breathing exercises that seemed to unlock hidden sources of energy, where he had shared the philosophical foundations that made physical techniques meaningful rather than merely destructive. "Your grandfather would be proud," Lou Heiken said, joining Maya in the basement that held so many formative memories. "Not just of your fighting success, but of how you have chosen to use that success to preserve and share his teachings." Maya nodded, though she wasn't entirely certain that Chen would approve of all the choices she had made. The public attention, the commercial aspects of professional fighting, the inevitable simplification of complex philosophical concepts for mass consumption. These were complications her grandfather had avoided by keeping his knowledge within the family, but Maya had also seen the positive effects of sharing those teachings more broadly. Young women who had watched her fights began seeking out martial arts training, not because they wanted to become professional fighters, but because they wanted to develop confidence and skills for self-protection. Traditional martial arts schools reported increased interest in pressure point techniques and internal energy cultivation. Academic researchers began studying the biomechanical principles underlying traditional fighting methods. "The knowledge was meant to be shared," Maya said. "Finally, my grandfather kept it hidden because he was afraid it would be misused, but hiding it completely would have meant it died with him." Lou Heiken smiled. "That is the wisdom of your generation, child. You understand that preservation sometimes requires adaptation." Maya's phone buzzed with a message from her publicist, reminding her of an interview she had scheduled with a major television network about her upcoming fight against a former Olympic boxer who had specifically requested the opportunity to test herself against Maya's techniques. The interview would be followed by a training session at the new facility, where she would demonstrate some of the basic principles her grandfather had taught her. As Maya prepared to leave the basement and return to the world of professional obligations and public attention, she took one last look around the space where her journey had truly begun. The concrete walls, the simple equipment, the sense of quiet intensity that had pervaded Chen teachings, all of it felt both familiar and distant. Like a childhood home that had been preserved but was no longer quite the same, Maya climbed the stairs toward the street level, where Tommy was waiting to drive her to the television interview. As they left Chinatown and headed toward the Midtown studio, Maya reflected on the path that had led her from invisible librarian to international fighting sensation. The transformation hadn't been without costs. Her quiet life was gone permanently, replaced by a schedule of training, competition, media obligations, and business decisions that sometimes left little time for the contemplative practices her grandfather had emphasized. The anonymity she had once treasured was impossible to reclaim, and every public appearance brought new scrutiny and new expectations. But Maya had also discovered aspects of herself that might have remained forever hidden if she had continued to prioritize safety and invisibility over authenticity and challenge. The confidence that came from proving herself against world-class opponents, the satisfaction of sharing knowledge that could benefit others, the sense of purpose that came from honoring her grandfather's legacy while creating her own. These were rewards she hadn't anticipated when she first walked into Murphy's boxing gym. As Tommy navigated the Midtown traffic, Maya closed her eyes and practiced the breathing techniques Chen had taught her 2 decades earlier. The familiar rhythm of controlled inhalation and exhalation helped center her mind and remind her of the deeper purposes underlying all the public attention and professional success. She was still at her core the granddaughter of an herbalist, who had carried ancient knowledge from one world to another, who had seen the potential for greatness in a small, quiet girl who was often overlooked by others. Everything else, the fights, the fame, the opportunities and obligations, were simply ways of expressing and sharing that fundamental identity. The car pulled up to the television studio, where a small crowd of fans and reporters had gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who had somehow made traditional martial arts relevant to modern audiences. Maya took a deep breath, checked her appearance in the side mirror, and prepared to once again explain and demonstrate the techniques that had transformed her life. As she walked toward the studio entrance, Maya thought about her grandfather and the responsibility he had placed on her shoulders when he chose to share his family's secrets with her. She was still learning how to carry that responsibility, still discovering the best ways to honor his memory while creating her own legacy. But she was no longer the invisible woman who had hidden her abilities out of fear or uncertainty. She was Maya Chen, inheritor of ancient wisdom, professional fighter, and teacher of those who were ready to learn. And for the first time in her life, that felt like exactly who she was meant to be. 3 years later, Dr. Maya Chen walked through the corridors of the specialized training facility that had grown from her partnership with Tommy Kowalski and Lou Heiken into something resembling a small university. The building occupied an entire city block in Queens, its modern exterior hiding training rooms, research laboratories, dormitories, and a library that contained one of the world's most comprehensive collections of traditional martial arts texts. Transformation of Maya's life had continued to accelerate in the years following her victory at Madison Square Garden. Her fighting career had evolved beyond boxing to include mixed martial arts competitions, specialty exhibitions, and demonstration events at medical conferences where she illustrated the anatomical principles underlying traditional pressure point techniques. But the fighting, which had initially been the focus of all the attention, had gradually become just one aspect of a much larger mission. Maya had earned a doctorate in biomedical engineering through an accelerated program that allowed her to combine her practical knowledge of human anatomy with formal scientific training. Her dissertation on traditional pressure point applications in modern medical practice had been published in several peer-reviewed journals and was being used as the foundation for new research into non-invasive pain management techniques. The training facility now served multiple purposes. Serious martial artists came from around the world to study the traditional techniques that Maya and Lou Heiken taught. But the center also hosted medical researchers who were investigating the therapeutic applications of pressure point stimulation, and served as a refuge for women and children who needed to learn self-defense skills in safe, supportive environment. Maya paused outside one of the main training rooms, where she could see a class in progress. The instructor was Sarah Martinez, who had transitioned from photography journalism to teaching after discovering that documenting Maya's story had been less satisfying than becoming part of it. Sarah was working with a group of teenage girls, teaching them basic self-defense techniques that emphasized awareness, de-escalation, and precise defensive responses rather than aggressive confrontation. Through the window, Maya could see that the students were practicing the kind of minimal, efficient movements that had become the signature of the Chen family system. The techniques looked almost ridiculously simple compared to the elaborate martial arts forms that most people associated with traditional training. But Maya knew that their simplicity was deceptive. "How are the new students progressing?" Maya asked as Sarah's class concluded for the day. Sarah smiled, wiping sweat from her forehead with a towel. "Better than I expected. That girl in the blue shirt, Maria, she's already showing remarkable intuition for pressure point identification. She reminds me a little of you when you were first learning, according to Lou Heiken's stories." Maya nodded, pleased to hear that the teaching methods they had developed were producing results. One of the ongoing challenges of the training center was determining how to identify students who had the potential to master the more advanced techniques while ensuring that the knowledge wasn't shared with individuals who might misuse it. They had developed a careful screening process that evaluated not just physical aptitude, but also character, emotional stability, and philosophical alignment with the principles underlying the traditional teachings. Students were required to spend months studying the historical and philosophical foundations of the martial arts before they were permitted to learn any techniques that could be used to cause serious harm. Maya's phone buzzed with a reminder about her afternoon appointment. She was scheduled to meet with representatives from the World Health Organization who were interested in incorporating traditional pressure point therapies into their global health initiatives. The meeting was part of a larger effort Maya was leading to bridge the gap between ancient knowledge and modern medical practice. "I have to run," Maya told Sarah. "But let me know how Maria progresses. If she continues to show promise, we should consider inviting her to attend the advanced workshops." Maya made her way to her office on the building's top floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Manhattan's skyline in the distance. The office was a study in contrasts. Modern ergonomic furniture and state-of-the-art computer equipment shared space with ancient texts, traditional medical instruments, and photographs from her grandfather's herb shop. Lou Heiken was waiting for her, seated in his usual chair near the window where the afternoon light was best for reading. At 75, he moved more slowly than he had when Maya first met him, but his mind remained sharp and his knowledge of traditional techniques continued to deepen through his ongoing research and practice. "The WHO representatives will be here in 20 minutes, Liu informed her. "I've prepared the demonstration materials you requested, and I've also brought some additional research that might interest them." Maya reviewed the agenda for the meeting while Lou Heiken provided context about the political and cultural considerations they would need to navigate. The integration of traditional healing methods with modern medical practice was a complex undertaking that required diplomatic skill as well as technical knowledge. "How many countries have expressed official interest in the pilot program?" Maya asked. 17 so far, with preliminary agreements from 8. "The challenge, as always, is training qualified practitioners who understand both the traditional techniques and the modern medical contexts in which they can be safely applied." This had been one of the most significant obstacles Maya had encountered in her efforts to share her grandfather's teachings more broadly. The pressure point techniques that formed the foundation of her fighting abilities could also be used for healing and pain relief, but they required years of study to master safely. Most medical professionals were reluctant to invest the time necessary to learn methods that seemed to contradict their conventional training. Maya had addressed this challenge by developing simplified versions of the traditional techniques that could be learned relatively quickly by healthcare workers while still providing therapeutic benefits. The compromise wasn't ideal from a purist perspective, but it represented a practical way to make the knowledge accessible to people who could use it to help others. The WHO representatives arrived precisely on time. A delegation of 5 medical professionals and policy experts who had been studying Maya's research and the preliminary results from pilot programs in several developing countries. Maya welcomed them to the facility and began with a tour that was designed to demonstrate the integration of traditional and modern approaches. They visited the research laboratory, where Maya's team was using advanced imaging technology to study the effects of pressure point stimulation on the human nervous system. The laboratory looked like any other modern research facility, but the techniques being studied were based on knowledge that had been passed down through Maya's family for centuries. Dr. Elizabeth Johansson, the delegation's lead medical expert, examined some of the brain scans that showed the neurological effects of traditional pressure point treatments. These results are remarkable. Dr. Chen, we're seeing measurable changes in pain perception and stress responses that match or exceed what we typically achieve with pharmaceutical interventions. Maya nodded. The techniques are effective precisely because they work with the body's natural systems rather than trying to override them. My grandfather always taught that the human body knows how to heal itself if you give it the right kind of assistance. They moved to one of the treatment rooms, where Maya demonstrated some of the simplified techniques she had developed for medical applications. The demonstration subject was Tommy Kowalski, who had volunteered to help with research projects after discovering that Maya's techniques were remarkably effective at managing the chronic pain from old boxing injuries. Maya's hands moved with the same precision she had displayed in her fighting career, but now the techniques were applied for healing rather than harm. She located specific pressure points on Tommy's shoulders and back, applying gentle but focused pressure that produced immediate changes in his posture and breathing. The key, Maya explained to the observing medical professionals, is understanding that every pressure point can be used for multiple purposes. The same anatomical knowledge that allows precise application of force in combat can be used to promote healing, reduce pain, and restore balance to the body's natural systems. Dr. Johansson made detailed notes while Maya worked. Johansson made detailed notes while Maya worked, asking technical questions about the specific anatomical targets and the mechanisms by which the treatments produced their effects. Maya answered each inquiry with the precision of someone who understood both the traditional philosophy and the modern scientific principles underlying her techniques. After the demonstration, the delegation spent 2 hours reviewing research data, discussing implementation strategies, and exploring the logistical challenges of training healthcare workers in techniques that required such precise anatomical knowledge. Maya found herself serving as both technical expert and cultural translator, helping the WHO representatives understand how ancient wisdom could be adapted for modern medical contexts. The preliminary results from our pilot programs are encouraging, Maya explained, pulling up data from programs in rural clinics across 3 continents. Healthcare workers who completed our abbreviated training course reported significant success in treating chronic pain conditions that had been resistant to conventional therapies. Dr. Johansson reviewed the statistics with obvious interest. The cost-effectiveness alone makes this worth pursuing. If we can achieve these kinds of results without expensive pharmaceutical interventions or complex medical equipment, the potential impact in underserved communities could be transformative. As the meeting concluded, Maya felt the familiar satisfaction that came from sharing knowledge that could genuinely help people. This was what her grandfather had always intended, not the fighting career that had made her famous, but the healing applications that represented the true heart of his family's traditions. The WHO delegation departed with commitments to move forward with expanded pilot programs and additional research funding. Maya stood at her office window, watching the sun set over the city where her journey had begun 3 years earlier in Tommy's small gym. Lou Hyken joined her at the window, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he contemplated the view. "Your grandfather would be amazed by what you have accomplished, child. From a single sparring session to global health initiatives, it is more than any of us could have imagined." Maya smiled, thinking about the quiet man who had taught her to see strength in unexpected places. I think he always knew this knowledge was meant for more than just one family. He was just waiting for the right person to carry it into the world. Her phone buzzed with a message from her publicist, reminding her about the documentary crew that would be arriving tomorrow to film the final segments of a project about traditional martial arts in modern contexts. There was also a message from a former UFC champion requesting private training and an invitation to speak at a medical conference in Geneva. Maya looked around her office at the ancient texts and modern research, the photographs of her grandfather, and images from her fighting career, the evidence of a life that had somehow bridged two very different worlds. She had become exactly what Chen Wei had hoped she might, a guardian of ancient wisdom, who understood how to share it responsibly with a modern world that desperately needed what it could offer. The small woman who had once hidden her abilities was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that true strength came not from keeping secrets, but from knowing when and how to reveal them. 6 months later, Maya walked through the doors of Murphy's boxing gym one final time. The media circus had died down, the documentary deals were signed, and her professional fighting career was flourishing. But she had never forgotten where it all began. Tommy looked up from the heavy bag he was holding for a young fighter and broke into a wide grin. "Well, look who's back. How's the famous life treating you?" Maya smiled, pulling on hand wraps with the same methodical precision she'd always used. "It's good, Tommy, but I wanted to come back and spar with Marcus one more time. Fair and square." Marcus Rodriguez, fully recovered and training seriously again, stepped forward with respect in his eyes. "I've been waiting for this rematch, Maya. No cameras, no crowds, just two fighters testing each other." As they touched gloves in the center of the ring where everything had started, Maya felt the circle complete. She had proven herself to the world, shared her grandfather's wisdom globally, and built something meaningful from ancient teachings. But here, in this small gym with these people who had believed in her from the beginning, she remembered why she had started this journey. In the first place, the bell rang, and Maya Chen, no longer invisible, no longer hiding, stepped forward to meet her challenge with the quiet confidence of someone who had finally found her place in the world. Maya's transformation from invisible librarian to martial arts legend shows us that extraordinary potential can hide in the most unexpected places. If this story inspired you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more amazing stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things.